Okay, so this should be Friday's lesson, and our aim is how can we find the distance traveled? Okay, so that's our goal for today. And when I come back, I have a really good example, but I have to kind of be there in person to show you. But we will definitely go over that when I come back. So let's say that we have our starting position as t to the fourth minus 8t squared. Okay? So let's start just a little review from yesterday. Let's find the velocity and the acceleration. Okay, so the velocity should be this, and the acceleration should be this. Okay, now let's say that we want to find how far did a particle travel going from 0 to 4. So I'm going to write that in these brackets as 0 to 4. And that's going to represent a starting and an end point, 0 and 4. So remember we said S of t is the starting position. This always tells you the location of the particle. So at 1 second, I could just plug 1 in there, and I get 1 minus 8, and that tells me the particle's at negative 7. So let me just go to the next page. I'll draw a little diagram. So remember, S of t was this. And I always like to use the number line as an example. I just think it's so easy to see. Okay, so at 0 seconds, so at S of 0, we would just get 0 minus 0, which is 0. So that means at 0 seconds, before anything even started, here's where I am. I'm at 0. Okay, so where was I after 1 second? I plug 1 in, and I get 1 minus 8, and that's negative 7. So that would be down here somewhere. So that means I went from 0 to negative 7. So that means my velocity was negative because I went in a negative direction. Okay, where was I at 2? Okay, so S of 2, I'm going to get 2 to the fourth, which is 16, minus 2 squared is 4, 4 times 8 is 32, and I'm going to get negative 16. So I'm running out of space here, but it would mean I'm going in that direction until I get to negative 16. Okay, so that's how you could tell where you are at any given time. But of course, it doesn't have to be an integer. It could also be a fraction. Okay, so, but our goal was to find out how far did I travel from 1 to 4. So, of course, you could just put in 1, 2, 3, and 4 and see where you are. So that's a little annoying. So why don't we find out where we were at 4 and where we are at 1. Well, I could have done it in either order. And then we'll figure out what's the amount that we changed. I'm sorry, I had said from 0 to 4. Okay, so S of 0 we said was already going to be 0. And S of 4 is going to be 4 to the fourth minus 8 times 4 squared. And let's see, so we're going to have 16 times 16, so it's going to be 256 minus 8 times 16. Let's see, 16 times 8, 4 is 128. So we're going to get 256 minus 128, and that is going to give us 128. So it would, so let's write 128 over here. Okay, so we started at 0, and S of 4 was 128, so it would appear that we traveled 128. But I can tell you right now that's the wrong answer. Because something that we did not consider is what happened between 0 and 4. What if, so if this is my number line and this is 0, this is 128. What we're thinking is, oh, we just went from 0 all the way to 128. But what if that's not what I did? What if instead I decided to walk until I got to 100, and then I said, oh wait, I forgot something back at my friend's house, so now I have to walk back. Whoops, sorry, things just went crazy on my screen. So I'm going to walk backwards to 50. Now how far have I traveled so far? I've done 100, and I've done 50, And now I'm going to walk all the way to the end to the 128. So I walked another 78. Okay, so we had originally gotten 128. We're way over the 128. So the thing we didn't consider is, what if we stopped and turned around? So that's what we have to think about. So how would we know if we stopped and we turned around? Doesn't this happen to you all the time? You leave your house and then you forget something, you have to go back? Okay, maybe not all the time, but some of the time. So we know to find if we stop to turn around, that would be when the velocity is equal to 0. Okay, so let's find the velocity. And we're going to set that equal to 0. Okay, so we can factor out a 4t. And we can factor again, because this is the difference of two squares. Okay, and it looks like we're going to have three answers here. We're going to get t equals 0, t equals -2, and t equals 2. So first of all, we had said yesterday that time can never be negative, so exclude that as a possibility. Remember, we're looking for a time that we stopped and turned around. Now at t equals 0, we're just starting there. It's impossible for us to actually walk and turn around, so we're going to exclude that as an answer. And the only possibility is that at t equals 2, we stop to turn around. But to know for sure if that's what happened, we need to find the acceleration. So the acceleration is going to be this. And then we have to check the acceleration at 2 to make sure that that does not equal 0 as well. Because if it does, that means I did not stop and turn around. That means I'm completely stopped. I'm done. So we're going to get 12 times 4 minus 16. This is 48 minus 16, and that does not equal 0. So that means at t equals 2, we stopped and turned around. Okay, so how is this going to help us to figure out how far we travel? So I'm going to erase all this. What we're going to do is we're going to find out how far do we travel from 0 to 2, then how far do we travel from 2 to 4. Okay, because at 2 we stopped and went in another direction, but you still count that. That's still a distance. Even if you have to walk back to your house 2 miles, you still walk 2 miles. Okay, so we're going to do s of 0, which we already knew was 0. I'm going to do s of 2. So I'm substituting into this function here. So 2 to the 4th is 16 minus 2 squared is 4. 4 times 8 is 32. That gives me -16. So I started at 0. I ended up at -16. That means I traveled for 16. Okay, so that's our first piece. Then we'll do the second piece. So s of 2 we just did. We know it's -16. And s of 4 we did earlier. I hope I still have that on the last page. No, I don't. Okay. Okay, and s of 4, if we put that in there, I believe that was 148. Let me just double check. So 4, so remember I'm putting it into here. So 4 to the 4th is 256 minus 8 times 16. And I believe we said 8 times 16 was 128. Yeah, so the whole thing was 128. Okay, so let's erase this. Okay, so how far did we travel? We started at -16, think of the number line, and then we went another 128. So to get to 0, we had to travel 16, and then we went another 128. So we have to add 128 plus 16, which is 144. Okay, so let's just go back and see, what did we just figure out? We just figured out that in the first 2 seconds we traveled 16, and then between the second and fourth second we traveled 144. So to add those two numbers together, and 144 plus 16 is going to equal 160, and that's how far we traveled. Okay, so I know this sounds a little confusing. Let's write all the steps. Okay, so this is how to find the distance traveled. So step 1, did the particle, sorry, that was my husband sneezing in the background, I apologize. Did the particle stop and change direction? Sorry. If no, right, maybe I never stopped and changed direction, then I just took a direct route. So if no, find the location of the particle at the starting point and at the end point, and find the difference. Okay, and I'm going to put in parentheses absolute value. Sorry about that. Okay, so I just want to go back for 1 second. So if you look at this example over here, right, we wanted to know how to get from negative 16 to 128, but we have to think of everything in terms of positive values. Okay, back. So this is if the particle did not stop and change direction. Okay, but step 2, if the particle did stop and change direction, so if the particle did stop and change direction, and I'm just going to parentheses when velocity equals 0, but acceleration does not equal 0. Okay? Then find when it changed direction and set up separate intervals. By intervals, I mean like when I did from 0 to 2 and then from 2 to 4, those would be considered my intervals. Okay, and set up different intervals to find each distance. And then add the distances. Okay, so let's start with a problem from the very beginning, and hopefully this will make a little bit more sense too. Let me just change the color. Sick of these same colors. How about blue? Okay, so let's say that our starting position is this. And we want to find how far did it travel in the interval from 0 to 3. Okay, so according to our steps, the first thing we have to do is find out, did it stop and change direction? So we're going to find the velocity. But 4 times 2 is not 16. And then we're going to take our velocity, we're going to set it equal to 0. I'm going to solve. Okay, so t is the cube root of 1/8. So the cube of 1 is just 1, and the cube of 8 is 2. So at t equal 1/2, probably change direction, but let's just double check the acceleration. And we're going to check the acceleration at 1/2. And we get 12. So the acceleration did not equal 0. So we know definitely when t equals 1/2, it's a change direction. So we're going to set up our intervals. We're going to go from 0 to 1/2, and then we're going to go from 1/2 to 3. Okay, and then we're going to add those together. So let me make some room here. Okay, so we're going to do s of 0, which is going to give me 0, and s of 1/2. So I'm substituting into here. Whenever you want to know the location, it's always the starting position. So we get 2 times 1/2 to the 4th minus 1/2. Okay, so it's going to be 2 times 1 over 16 minus 1/2. That's going to be 2 over 16 minus 1/2. I'll go over here. It's going to be 1 over 8 minus 1/2. Find a common denominator, 4/8, and we get negative 3/8. Okay, so s of 0 was 0. I'll put that over here. And we went to negative 3/8. Make some room here. Okay, so we started at 0. At s of 1/2, we were at negative 3/8. So how far did we travel? We traveled 3/8 because you're always going to use the absolute value. Okay, now we have to do the next one. So at 1/2, we already know we were at negative 3/8. And where did we end up at 3? So we're going to put 3 into s of t. So we get 2 times 3 to the 4th minus 3. So 2 times 81 minus 3. 162 minus 3, we get 159. Okay, so think of a number line here. Here's 0. We were at negative 3/8. This is where we were. And we ended up at 159. So how far did we travel? We traveled 159 and 3/8. Okay, let's make some room. Okay, so how far did we go all together? We went 159 and 6/8. I guess if you want to reduce that, you can. They each divide by 2. We get 159 and 3/4. Okay, so I think that's plenty for you for today, and we'll come back on Monday. I will show you the PowerPoint. Hopefully things will make a lot more sense then.